Customer expectations are constantly evolving, and so are data privacy laws. So, how is a company's MarTech platform expected to keep up? Well, to stay ahead of the curve, many brands have not only had to make technical, but also cultural changes as well. Talking about this today, we have Terrell Baker, the director of Data Empowerment Limited, who recently wrote the paper, People Are Not Static. Data collection practices need to reflect that. And we have Michael Fisher, the CEO of 3Radical, also talking about this. Both of you, thank you for joining me. Terrell, let's start with you. Why did you write this paper?
Hi, Rafa. I wrote the paper because people's or customers' demands are changing constantly around what they expect from their products and from their services. And what we're seeing is there's far more onus now for the customer to be treated like the data is their data, and the businesses and services need to start seeing now that they've earned that data, rather than being traditionally where the business has felt there's been all their data.
Michael, this is obviously something you're very passionate about, talking about earned data. Do you have anything that you want to add to that? I mean, people have to make these evolutions, and you guys over at 3Radical have done a good job of trying to stay ahead of the curve.
Sure. Thank you, Rafer. And Terrell, thank you as well. So, but to Terrell's point and the point of the paper, consumers are really aware of the data that they offer and the value it provides. They're willing to share. If you show that there's value exchange that's meaningful to them and that you're going to serve them more effectively, they'll share a lot with you, make my life easier. But if not, if you're going to target them and run around and put in the surveillance strategies that follow people around on the web for anything and everything, and you become more of an intrusive bother rather than an embracing service-oriented business, you're going to find that consumers are going to walk. They're going to leave you. And so to the extent that you realize that they're willing to share the data, don't buy it, ask for it, pay for it when they give it to you with some form of value exchange. It doesn't have to be monetary. Lots of value is zero risk. It's early access to content. It's things that elicit feedback where the consumer feels comfortable giving it. And when you do that, you protect your business in so many different ways.
And Terrell, in the paper, you talk about the making of the cultural changes, and the technological changes seem fairly obvious. Is it difficult for companies, in your experience, to make those cultural changes?
Very much so. I think the cultural change is often harder for the organization than the technical change. And I think there's two reasons for that. The first one on the cultural change is organizations are still driven by the bottom dollar and the profit, and that tends to be broken by a product or by a service that's offered to the customer rather than looking at the customer holistically. So while some companies will put that sort of secondary layer of the customer segmentation overlap, but they always put the brand or the product first, and they really need to start culturally thinking about putting the customer first. The second point around it also is that often they view the data as someone else's problem or responsibility within the organization. So they'll look at their interaction with the customer as about the relationship with the customer or the service with the customer, but not thinking about the attributes that support that. And it's very important that those people that have that connection and that relationship with the customer are also thinking about those data attributes that go with it.
Michael, have you found that that's the case as well? I mean, you in your gamification platform is a philosophical shift for a lot of people. What has been your experience with companies willing to make some of these cultural changes?
I think companies still, to Terrell's point, struggle, right? Terrell's background is banking, big banking. I have spent a few years fiddling around in banks myself, have been a banker. And the reality is that the bank really cares about the checking product, the savings product, the credit product, the debit product, the HELOC product, the lending product, the commercial side of the product, and each of those silos approaches a consumer independently. But as the consumer, I don't care about that. I don't want to know about all of your silos. I want you to serve me in a way that's meaningful to me. And if I decide that I'm going to have the checking account because I want auto bill pay and I want advanced deposit strategies from that checking account, and I want to have a debit card that's linked to it, but oh, by the way, I want to have a debit card and an account that's set up for my small business. I want you to treat me as me, not the 5 products I just discussed with you. And so that's the hard thing organizationally. People understand that they have to do the segmentation. They understand they need to treat different customers differently. Culturally, companies have to now understand more than ever, if you can't align around what the consumer's expectations are, they'll help you understand exactly how they feel about that when they walk out the door.
One of the things that we've seen in the research is that, people are interacting across multiple digital platforms, yet they still want that seamless customer experience. And you touched on that a little bit, Michael, asking for both of you here is, how does a brand or a company navigate that and integrate those silos? A lot of companies have failed at this and have lost customers as a result of this.
Definitely. And I think one of the reasons why many companies do fail at it is it's very, very difficult. And I wouldn't underestimate the technical aspect to that as well. If you're looking at across your multiple channels, if you're thinking about your interaction with a customer from a app or a web, you'd be looking for real-time data. If maybe a customer has more of a bricks and mortar sort of interface, that might be a batch end of day data. So systems and companies really have to invest a large amount of money in being able to integrate that data accurately and timely, so for the customer that's seamless. Then for that second point, it is then thinking about what your customer is. So often the integration when the companies do spend the money is thinking about it from a tech perspective, or what's, again, from that product perspective, around actually thinking about what does the customer, or what is the customer telling them is their preference. Does one customer have a preference for via email? So therefore you should be defaulting it to being at their preference. And another customer has a different preference, say, for phone call. So it's doing it in two ways with the customer. One, either asking them for what their preference is and making sure you change your channel to support them in that way, or actually looking at how the customer does interact with you and looking for what their preferred method is. And then going back to Michael's point about earned data, well, actually checking with them, is that their preference, or do they not even understand? Maybe one of the other channels may also be of use to them, but you haven't explored that with them.
Michael,
It's a really great point. I do, and it's a really great point, Terrell, because we work with banks, as you know, and some of the things that we've learned along the way, when the experiences are disconnected, attrition goes up, right? So we work with a bank now that has done a really good job from a digital connectivity and transformation perspective. When they first started rolling out web and mobile banking, I mean, as you might imagine, I've got all these new products and I have this fabulous new app, and don't you want to have your life just completely be turned in a positive direction because of all these digital capabilities? The branch personnel didn't know anything about it. So the consumer walked in and didn't quite understand everything. And so their attrition rate actually went up. So what they did was say, how do we incorporate our brand ambassadors, right? People at the platform, people at the teller line, people in the call center. They went through a whole planning strategy around how to indoctrinate the branch and brand ambassador folks into the center of the digital transformation. They saw overall platform activity drop double digit in terms of percentage, and they saw mobile and web adoption go up by over 40%. And that included account openings, that included digital, like bill payment and bill presentment and auto bill and all those things, direct deposits, all the things that the bank makes money on when nobody touches it. And so we see, quite honestly, that disconnected experience creates a challenge. But when you do connect across and show the consumer that you're there to make their lives easier, independent of product and channel, they love it and run on it.
One of the questions you pose in the paper, Terrell, is who owns the data? I'm going to guess the short answer is the consumer owns the data. If the consumer does own the data, how do you incentivize them to give it to you? I know that's probably a loaded question.
Actually, play devil's advocate, it depends on what the data is. So as far as who owns the data, elements like name, date of birth, passport, you own that. That's your data. When it starts coming to the interactions between a business and that customer, well, then you could actually argue it's a joint ownership between the company and the customer as to what that product or that service is, where that transaction place sits. So how do you sort of incentivize? There's a legacy of companies rewarding customers for being their customer, but I actually think companies should sort of start flipping it around and thinking about the customer providing that data as a reward to the company. And this is where the earned data aspect comes into it so much, because it needs to be that sort of that two-way interaction, that respect. So when a customer is providing data to you voluntarily, or effectively they rewarding you for it, you should respect that data, you should acknowledge that data, and you should be responding to the data. And then I'd sort of be effectively thinking about the rewards on both sides. So when you're rewarding the customer for that data, it doesn't need to be a gift. It could maybe be providing them with a better service. It could be providing them with a more nuanced service. So it's really sort of responding to the customer as an individual rather than sort of aggregated third-party data and almost guessing what you think they may want to receive.
The name of the paper again is called People Are Not Static. Data collection practices need to reflect that, written by Terrell Baker, the director of Data Empowerment Limited, and Michael Fisher, the CEO of Free Radical. This is a fascinating topic. We could go on and on and on about it. And I hope to have subsequent conversations because I learned a lot today and hopefully the audience did as well. Thank you both.
Thank you.